On this episode of Cars with Cory, we're going to start working on my 1990 F-150, getting it back on the road. So today we're in here working on the 1990 F-150 Lariat, regular cab, long box. It is a four-wheel drive truck. No push button on this one, but it has the 351 Windsor, aka the Ford dog, but leaks about everything, runs okay-ish, but we're going to start off with what I believe is an ECU issue. Apparently the capacitors over time start to leak and cause some problems with how it runs erratically. As you can see, this one has the very special glove box mod. Falls open, won't stay shut, so we'll fix that eventually, but just going to demonstrate here. We'll fire it up. It's going to idle way up. I've checked the IAC, or the idle air control valve. No issues with it. It's clean. So do believe that problem is actually having to do with the ECM and the capacitors. So this will just be a demonstration of how it starts and runs. Hopefully you can hear it idle up, idle down. So start with fast idle and then kick it down here. It just actually won't hardly come off that fast idle. It's actually not doing too bad right now. After a short drive, it'll be stuck at about 1100 RPM. I've checked all the vacuum lines, no vacuum leaks to speak of. So it has also a kind of a very firm shift, and as I've done my research and kind of discovered, this is a direct reflection of kind of ECU issues. So let's pull it down to the shop, pull the ECU, and see what we find. Before we dig into the ECU, let's do a little walk around. So this is a 1990 F-150 Lariat, which I believe Lariat, amongst other things, gets you beauty rings on the wheels, chrome windshield surround. You do get power locks, power windows. This truck is equipped with both power locks, power windows. Locks are not working, windows still work great. Still have our wing window here, but overall a pretty decent truck. Searched quite a while, a couple of years ago, to find this one. This one has a little rust here and there, but nothing terrible. Previous owner was going to restore it, just never really got around to it. They did some exhaust, some other things, but replaced the bed. The bed is off of a different truck, but imagine the one that was on it was rusty. Overall, it's fairly solid. It has, you know, some things to be expected for a truck of this vintage. Suspension, especially in the front, not great. I've actually already replaced the rear springs and shocks. The leafs were just shot, so those got replaced. Just some normal, regular maintenance items, but as you can see here, has the typical 90s Ford paint peeling. I can tell from the door frame here, they didn't mask it very well. You can see where there's overspray, so it was repainted under warranty, but that unfortunately is failing pretty quickly here. So it does have the old farmer bumper. We did take the Lariat trim off and paint the Ford, although the top of the tailgate looks terrible. Unsure if we're going to repaint this truck or if we're going to just basically make a good runner out of it. I think that's probably step one. The sun here, unfortunately, has roached the hood. The paint on it is terrible. I believe at some point somebody had the hood off because there's a good amount of scratches on it, as if it sat upside down and just got scratched on the high points here. But again, overall, a pretty solid truck. It does run and drive. I wouldn't take it anywhere like some people like to say. I'd take it uptown to haul some stuff to the dump, things like that. Not real too happy at highway speeds, mostly because of what I think is going on with the ECU. Front suspension just isn't there. It needs to be totally rebuilt. But other than that, you know, runs, drives, brakes work. I've struggled with batteries. I keep putting used batteries in it because it really doesn't get used that much. But overall, a pretty solid truck. Guy I bought it from His brother was the original owner, and it really only got driven once a week for about the last 10 years up to the feed store to get some feed for some of the animals on his farm. So I'll pop the hood here and get started on the ECU stuff. So as I said earlier, it is equipped with the 5.8 Windsor. Not my favorite motor by any means, but does run, leaks everything. We got an alternator issue. This one's really noisy. Might try to rebuild that on the channel instead of buying a new one. Pretty simple stuff, not real complicated, but standard customary on the hood, nothing really done. The point of today's video is the ECU, which you find right here. So pretty simple to take this out, really just one bolt, probably a 10 millimeter. I think this truck is right on the edge of standard metric, but we'll go ahead and pull that and then get inside and get the ECU out. Pretty simple to uninstall, kind of goes without saying, but I'll show a few shots of that as we go along. And of course, before we start anything, we want to disconnect the negative battery terminal. We certainly don't want any surges going to the ECU or any of the electronics while we're doing this work, so we're going to unhook the negative. So as mentioned, this is a 10 millimeter, not the greatest lighting in here, just dropped my socket. Not the greatest lighting in here, however, pretty simple, straightforward to pull out the connector from this side. So we'll go ahead and loosen this and pull the connector off of the ECU. So we have the connector loose. It doesn't really come out. The wire harness here kind of restricts it from moving, but it is loose from the ECM. We're going to go ahead and jump inside and pull the ECM down out of below the dash. So here inside the vehicle, we just have one of these interior fasteners. We're going to use a cat claw. I'm going to use my favorite interior panel removers to yank this out of here. The there we go. There's a screw over here in the trim piece that goes along the bottom of the door, which is not connected to anything anymore, so we don't have to worry about that. There is actually a plug connector, actually two on the back side, which will pull straight out from the door frame as it releases. These ones are pretty worn, so they didn't really give me any trouble. So from there we find the ECU right here, which we unplugged from the outside. Looks like we just have one 8 millimeter, looks like, bolt right here for the retainer bracket. We should be able to pull that bolt loose and pull the ECU right out. So we'll go ahead and pull out that 8 millimeter and pull the ECU from the kick panel on the driver's side. Retainer, and we should hopefully be able to just... Okay, we're back outside the vehicle. It took quite a bit of wiggling. I did actually have to pull the connector out of the receptacle on the firewall side and the engine side to get it to where it would release. Just have to grab a hold of it and kind of wiggle it up and down, rock it back and forth till you get it to kind of come out of there. You can move the wire harnesses that are kind of right behind the parking brake out of the way, but it will wiggle and fall down out of there. So first couple of observations, this thing is filthy, just covered in dirt and crud. We'll have to go ahead and clean that up, but let's go ahead and pop the cover off. Looks like probably a T15, maybe a T20, a couple of them on each side. Then we can see what we're dealing with here. So after wiping it down, some of the dirt off, we used a T10 actually. To pull the cover off, the side that says Ford, we'll end up pulling both of them off, but for now this will get us into the circuit board so we can at least see the capacitors. So there are 3 capacitors. We got 1, 2, and 3 here. Don't see any tremendously obvious signs of them leaking. The shelf life of a capacitor is really only 15 years or so. After that they start leaking. Surprisingly, for as dirty as it was on the outside, it's, I guess, somewhat clean on the inside. These are pretty dirty right here. But we'll go ahead and find our new capacitors and fire up the soldering iron and start removing these ones from the board. Okay, so knowing where the capacitors are on the board, here, here, and there, I've drawn a diagram which shows particularly the rating on the capacitor itself. I got all three of those. These two appear to be the same. And also mark the negative. The negative will always be the side of the capacitor. Like right here on this one, you see a black stripe. We'll want to make sure we orient the new ones in the same fashion. Negatives are on the opposite side where you can't see on the other two. One thing I did notice as I was recording those, I'll try to get the light in here. You notice the board is a bit discolored at the base of this one, which I think are signs of leaking. This one over here shows a little bit back in there, trying to manipulate the light as best as I can. This one down here also shows a little bit on this far side here, a little darker brown and green there. So obviously having some issues with these. I think what I'll probably end up doing is just pulling the caps off the top. See if I can get a plier underneath of there and just nip the legs off here and there. And then go ahead and start soldering it up, pulling out the old solder and applying some new. So a little discovery here, I actually pulled off the first capacitor, and as you can see, it's coming apart. It's all corroded on the end. Try to get that on camera as best as I can, but essentially there's a bunch of crud down there that fell out. As a matter of fact, when I touched it, one of the legs busted off. So I have pretty good reason to believe that this being our primary issue, running erratically, shifting erratically, we'll get some new capacitors in there and get this thing fixed up. So what I have here is just something I picked up on eBay, just a common set of capacitors for most of these Ford vehicles. I know applies more than just the F-150, the Bronco, and I think many other ECMs, but they provide 5 capacitors which fit the needs of just about any of these repairs. So we'll pick out the 3 we need and go ahead and solder them into the board. So a little update here, I have the legs unsoldered there. Hopefully you can see those little holes that have gone through. Got the legs pulled out, got most of the solder cleaned up. Got a little more to do over here on this guy, but really no tips of the trade here, guys. About the only thing I guess I can offer is get you a little piece of wire, stranded wire that's stripped, and basically press that down and pull up the large pieces of solder. For the small pieces, I like to use a solder sucker like this guy right here. You basically click it down, hold the iron over it, have this real close, and once you pull the heat away, hit the button, and essentially just vacuum sucks the solder up. So got the first set of legs done for the first one. We'll go ahead and find a capacitor for that guy, trim the legs, and go ahead and solder it in. Alright, so now that we have those cleared out, we've got the new capacitor in, negative properly oriented. A lot of ways to go about this as far as soldering. I'm just going to jump in and do it, and we'll cut the legs when we're done here. So see if I can do this and show it on camera at the same time. Oh, trying to get it to bubble down to the board here. There we go. Being very careful. I don't want to create a short by getting too much solder in the wrong place. That one fell right in. So heat him around there. Check the work here. Got a little excess. Probably suck that up here. But suck it right down to the board there. Again, careful not to get it onto any of the other connections or circuits here. There we go. I like that. So now we can trim the legs and move on to the next one. Alright everyone, so we've got the first one in. Try to get some focus here. See my 2 new solder joints right there, kind of middle frame. Probably not my best lay. It's hard to replicate what they do at the factory, but definitely in there. Got the leg correct in here. See our new black capacitor right there. Got some solder down on this side, board cleaned up, got a little goober there, but that will definitely do the trick. So I was checking out these other two. They're actually in pretty good shape. They're not leaking. I got in real close with the camera to kind of see what was going on. Tops are intact. Everything seems okay. I'm sure I'll regret this later, but I'm going to leave those two for now. Pop the ECU back in and see if we made any difference. Alrighty folks, the ECU's back in, the battery's hooked back up, so let's go ahead and start it up. Alrighty folks, the ECU's back in, battery's hooked back up, so let's start it up, hopefully it starts, and see if it idles any better. I did not put the kick panel back in since I might be taking this apart again, but let's see what happens. May run a little rough because we unhooked the battery, but let's see. Already coming quick down off the idle. Might be difficult to tell from the last video, but it'd still be idling rather high at this point. Let's kick it down off a high idle here and see what happens. So about at 900, 850, at about 850, very, very stable, no surging. I think it's safe to say that made a pretty tremendous difference. We just replaced the one capacitor, probably could have replaced them all. It's pretty tight in there, and I didn't want to disrupt any of the other things. One of them I really didn't feel good about if I disrupted some of the other electronics around it. So let's see if it comes right back down to idle. So still a little sluggish, but it's coming down. Before it would just basically never come down. So back down to 900 and right back to 850 and very, very stable. So I'm going to call this a success. We'll take it for a short drive here, see how it goes. I can already tell we're idling better in gear than we were before. So take her for a quick rip around the neighborhood here and see just how hopefully effective this little change was. Big giant clunk. See how our 1-2 shift is here. Oh, nice and easy. It's never shifted that nice and easy. Well, I'm going to call this a success. We'll be back to this truck eventually for other videos. So we're back after our test drive. Typically this thing would be bouncing all over the place. Looks like we're idling right about 800. Nice and smooth. Typically we'd be up 1300. Idle jumping all over the place. Still a little slow to come down, but does come down. We might have a titch of a vacuum leak hidden somewhere, but it does come down off of idle. Shifts into gear are no longer, knocking you out of your seat or jarring you. Does shift very, very smoothly down the highway, shifts normally. It also really wasn't working on the kick down. Like, you pounce on it and it really didn't kick down a gear, but now you come into it, you get a little bit of power. It's a 351 Windsor, probably under 200 horse stock like it is, but it does get up and go where it formerly just kind of fall on its face and dump more fuel to the injectors and not get very good fuel economy. So I'm going to call this a success. Definitely we'll have to do some more test driving, but just one silly little 50-cent capacitor was causing all these problems. So relatively easy to fix yourself. Don't need much more than hand tools, and be a little patient, be a little careful, but it's something that just about anybody can do. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cars with Cory. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. Really appreciate it. Really help me out as far as keeping things going and keeping these simple DIY fix projects on YouTube for you. Thanks.